I got a couple bottles from the 60s. Mostly it's a check-in for me on how are the 60s holding out. One wine, unknown producer, but an excellent vintage. One wine, a terrible vintage, but an excellent property, especially in the old days. I've opened these bottles maybe half an hour before we started getting into them. I kept them open overnight. How they perform the next day, I'll get into at the end. But for now, let's get tasting. What do we got in the glass? Look at that color. Now we're into some age. Now we've got the little bit of plumminess to it and faded. Very cloudy wine. It had a lot of sediment. Looked really, really good and smelled really, really good coming out of the bottle. Cork was actually in decent shape. I broke it, but I always break the old ones with the cork screws I have right now. Note to self, I really, really have to get a Durant. Beautiful, beautiful burnt sugar and a strawberry nose. It's quite light. It has no harsh edges. There's no volatility here. Lovely so far. And this maltiness on the nose too. It lacks a little bit of drive. Considering it's 61 years old, it's forgivable. A really superb example of the way old Burgundies used to be made. This is a Corton in a good year, but I think 64 is even known for that, being a little bit softer and being a little bit more generous in that sense in terms of an elegance to the fruit. I don't know that I've drank that many, but I've certainly read that. Candied licorice, there's some floral notes. It's very earthy as well, but not dirty, heavy earth. Very, very light. No vegetal and no cellar. I'm a little bit biased against the Cortons because of that root cellar type of thing. And maybe it's not Corton in particular. Maybe it's a bit more just the wines of Beaune in general. I find that in the old school styles, they get very root cellar and a bit dirty, and you either love it or you hate it. I find it quite rustic and not very nice. There's an elegance to this that I like. There's a finesse to this. If it had more drive in the mid palate, it would be fantastic. The finish is great. It's not a pushy finish, but it lingers with a slight drive. It's more just the mid palate that lacks density, so it lacks a little bit of oomph. Besides that, we got ourselves a pretty good one here. It's a 1964 Corton from Abel Garnier fils. I have no idea who this négociant is. Apparently in Marceau. 64 was a great year. That's the only reason I purchased this bottle. Of course, the price came into it. It was a reasonable price. And the vintage 64, I wanted to try something from the year before I was born. Worked out very nicely. I think this was a great example of Burgundy that's still alive and well and impressing. What do we got in the glass? Yes, this is darker, a little bit fresher color. You know, it's almost tea-like with some plum and some dark cherry. What a lovely nose. What a lovely old Bordeaux nose. This has got this kind of very oolong tea type of nose to it. That's so elegant, so voluptuous. Lovely. It reminds me of Palmer. It's got a nose like, I remember the old Palmer, the 70 Palmer, for instance, had this kind of a nose to it. A bit of licorice, a little bit of the pipe, maybe something floral, but there's a depth to it, and there's a bit of rubber in it, and then this oolong tea that just kind of flows through the whole thing. It's giving me shivers. When you take everything into account, vintage-wise, etc., and the fact that I just opened this is amazing. It's not a huge presence. It's not a huge wine. It's got a lovely, sweet mid-palate, a nice, soft entry, a bit of oomph there mid-palate too. It's not like it's fizzling out or anything like that. And then on the finish, it maybe dries out a little bit. But every time you go back to the well for another smell, it sort of reimposes itself. It's a wine with a certain flair for dramatic, but in a terrible vintage. It's like a problem child, but still oozes a little bit of something inherent. Something's there that keeps it alive and keeps it kind of groovy and keeps it happy and poignant. Poignant, I think, is the word I'm looking for. This is very food-like. I think I would want to eat with this if it wasn't so light. It's not as light as the Corton was. Mind you, it's a year younger, right? So what should it be? And this is the 65 La Mission Brion. I've had this wine before. I had it years ago, and I was equally impressed then. You saw in the opening of this bottle how the cork disintegrated. Didn't disintegrate in the sense that it was poorly stored, but during the travel, obviously, the cork leaked. There was some liquid in between the foil and cork. It hadn't turned to vinegar or anything like that. It was very fresh, and it wasn't leaking down the foil, so it was a fairly recent thing, probably just from the travel. That's one of the things too, right? I got this from France. It gets delivered to Sweden. That's a bit of a journey for old wines. They're not always going to arrive in the best of shape and super happy. And yet here it is, kind of singing its glory, singing its praises. I think this could bloom out over the evening. It feels like one of those wines that has more to give, that is ready to sort of let the wind lift its sails and take it further out into the stars. Stars feeling. Great wine. This was a birthier bottle as well, so extra special. Wine of the night was actually a wine that I don't have a tasting note for, at least one on film, with the 83 La Ville Haut Brion, the white La Mission. This was just full of life, absolutely beautiful, gorgeous honeycomb type of wax and saffron, very spicy, exotic flavors, a little bit of pineapple in there, a little bit of mango even, those kinds of flavors. But it was more its structure, its presence, its kind of heft, and the way it sort of stood up and announced itself to the world and really grew. We drank it way too fast. The best glass was at the end. There was a little note of something maybe just unclean or a little imperfect.
Only when you are clean will you know my power.
That was very easy to forgive and very easy to forget because the rest of it was monumental. But back to the 60s, the 64 Corton goes to show. Fantastic vintage, especially in Burgundy. Some of these négociants back in the day, they could be very good if you haven't heard of them. They may have only been in operation for a little while, or they didn't have a huge business. Sometimes worth taking a chance, definitely at the price, worth taking a chance. I love the fact that the fruit was so clean. It's an exercise in tasting what happens to old Pinot fruit when it just becomes sweeter and more strawberry-like over the years. It could also be a masterclass in wines that don't have an imposing structure, a very obvious structure, and yet still sit there. It's very feminine. It's still, everything is well built, and it's fine. You know, it's holding itself up even a day after. I had it the next morning, and it was fantastic. Next day. It was fantastic. It goes to show you don't have to always pursue anything that's like overly driven, or you don't have to think that it needs to be a big structured wine if it's going to have survived 60 years. This proves feminine wines hold very, very well. Absolutely no problem. I mean, La Mission I've had before, and when I had it, it had a little bit of the cellar overtone, the cabbage kind of funk to it, and yet the fruit was so ripe and beautiful and gorgeous. That black currant and some of those exotic spices and things like that, they overcame that without a problem. And that was the case with this bottle as well. The next day, the glass was singing. The last glass of the night, as the night went on, was the best in the evening. But surely the glass the next day was even better. It held in terms of its energy, but the flavors had become even more developed and more pipe laden, pipe tobacco laden. That sort of complexity to it. Never going to be a superpower wine, never going to be a 95 plus type of wine. Experience-wise, definitely, I would go up to 93, 94 on the quality of the wine too. So really good if you see these. And they're reasonably priced. If they're reasonably priced, then they're worth trying, and you have some kind of interest if it's a birthier bottle or you got something to do with the 60s, somehow some kind of connection to it. Definitely worth purchasing. Other than that, no. There's too many great wines out there. The first time I bought the 65 La Mission was well under 100 euros. But now it was over 200, and I split the cost with my guest, so that made it manageable, and it was kind of nice to revisit the bottle, especially in this an anniversary year. Would I do it again? Maybe when I'm 75. Why not? Hey, that's what I have for this time. I'm wondering how many wines from the 60s you've had the privilege of trying. I'm also wondering if you enjoyed them. I'm also wondering if you would take the risk to buy them. I think that's the kind of the overriding story here is, should we be taking a chance on these older bottles? Are the 60s bottles holding up even with the weaker names or in the weaker vintages? The answer from me is a resounding yes, just based on these two bottles. But in general, I feel perfectly confident in gambling a little bit. I don't care. I'm all in, baby. How about you? Thanks a lot for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments, and stay thirsty.